9 words showed up on my phone on a Tuesday night in November, and they undid 30 years of careful work in about the time it took to read them. I'm sorry. I should have said it 30 years ago. I had a wall outlet hanging half out of the box and a screwdriver in my hand when the message came through an electrician's own house, being the last place electricity ever gets any respect. And when I saw the name attached to those words, the screwdriver slipped out of my fingers and bounced off the linoleum. I left it there. I left the wires hanging out of the wall. I sat down at my own kitchen table like a man who'd just heard a sound in a house he thought was empty. Sarah Mitchell. I hadn't let myself type that name into anything in over a decade. Not a search bar, not a message, nothing. That wasn't strength. That was a thing you learn how to do. The way you learn which floorboards creak so you can step around them in the dark. For 30 years I had believed one thing about Sarah Mitchell, and I had built an entire understanding of myself on top of it. And in 9 words she was about to tell me that the thing I believed was wrong, that the silence I'd spent half my life explaining, had never been hers at all. But I'm getting ahead of it. Let me tell you who I'd become by that Tuesday. Because the apology doesn't mean anything until you know what it landed on. I'm Owen, and I run a small electrical outfit in a Kentucky town where half the houses are older than the people complaining about their wiring. I want to be clear that I had a good life. That part matters to me. I wasn't some lonely man keeping a candle in the window for the past to walk back through. I had work I was proud of, friends I'd kept since high school, a truck that started most mornings, knees that called the rain better than any app. I'd been married 23 years to a woman named Linda, and we'd loved each other for a good stretch and respected each other for most of it, and one quiet Sunday admitted we'd become better at co-parenting than at marriage. There was no villain in it. Nobody cheated. Nobody slammed a door. We just ran out of road and stopped pretending the map went any further. We had a daughter, Grace, grown now, who called every Sunday and still made me check her breaker panel over video like she hadn't watched me do it 100 times growing up. So that was the life the message walked into. A settled one. A decent one. And before all of it, before Linda, before Grace, before the invoices and the divorce papers, and the long habit of sleeping on one side of the bed there, had been Sarah. We met the summer before senior year at the county fairgrounds. I was up a ladder stringing temporary lights in the livestock barn for my uncle, and she was working the lemonade stand because her church youth group had drawn the least glamorous corner of July. She handed me a cup, looked at the cut on my cheek and the dust in my hair, and said, "You look like you lost a fight with a toolbox." I told her it was a draw. She laughed, and I forgot how hot it was. She lived on the north side of town in a brick house with white columns and a mother who treated appearances like a branch of the faith. Sarah's father had died when she was 12, and her mother Eleanor had run that house alone ever since with a grip I understand a lot better now than I did then. Back then, I just thought she was cold. Now I think she was a frightened woman holding on to the only thing she had left and squeezing it too hard. I lived on the other side of town, behind my father's repair shop, in a family that knew the shape of every dollar before it left the house. By 17, I could change a dryer belt faster than I could write a paragraph about Shakespeare. Eleanor Mitchell did not think much of a boy like me. Sarah did. That was the whole miracle of that year. We spent it walking the town after school, sitting in the back row of football games neither of us cared about, splitting fries at Ruth's Diner because I was broke and she'd swear she wasn't hungry when she plainly was. We talked about leaving, not running away, but leaving right. College for her. Trade school for me. Some apartment down the line with ugly carpet and bills we'd complain about together. Young love thinks wanting something badly enough is the same as a plan. It isn't. But it wasn't nothing either. She kept a blue notebook where she wrote down things she didn't want to forget, songlines. Things people said. Ideas for children's books she swore she'd write someday. Once, when she thought I wasn't looking, I saw my own name in the margin. Owen fixed the radio and pretended it was nothing. That sentence stayed with me about 20 years longer than it had any right to. The last good afternoon we had was in May, 2 weeks before graduation. We drove out to the fairgrounds when it was empty. Just locked booths and quiet barns and the smell of grass cooking under a spring sun, and we sat on the hood of my truck eating gas station sandwiches, and she was quiet the whole time. When I asked what was wrong, she looked over at the folded-up frame of the Ferris wheel and told me her mother wanted her in Lexington for the summer with an aunt. All summer. I said that wasn't the end of the world, and she just said my name, Owen, in a way that told me it was the beginning of one. "We'll write," I said. "I'll write so much you'll get sick of me." She took my hand and said she wouldn't. 2 weeks later, she was gone. No goodbye, no call, no note. I went to her house the morning after graduation because we'd planned to meet at Ruth's, and she never showed. Eleanor answered the door in pearls at 9 in the morning and told me Sarah was with family, and when I asked when she'd be back, she said that wasn't my concern anymore. I remember a bee knocking against the window by the door. I remember the paint peeling near my shoes. And I remember her last line, delivered with a kind of polished pity, "It would be kinder if you stopped making this harder for her." That sentence ended up shaping more of my life than I'd ever admit to a stranger. I wrote her anyway. 11 letters over 6 months. The first was angry and scared. The second mostly apologized for the first. One had a photograph of the fairgrounds folded inside. None ever came back, none were ever answered, and after a while pride did what heartbreak couldn't, and I stopped. Years went the way years go, even when part of you refuses to move with them. I married Linda at 28 and told her about Sarah once, early, because secrets turn to mold in the dark. Linda heard me out and said, "First love leaves a mark. Just don't ask me to live under it." Fair, I tried not to. But every so often Sarah's name would rise up in me for no good reason, a song in the grocery store, the fair banner going up over Maine in July, a woman in a yellow scarf, and I'd wonder if she'd married, if she had kids, and underneath all of it the one question that never fully died. Did she leave me? Or was I just the kind of man who was easy to leave? When her message came 30 years later, that question came back with teeth. I didn't answer that night. I closed the app, finished the outlet because a man has to do something with his hands, and sat in the dark kitchen feeling too old to be undone by 9 words, and too honest to pretend I wasn't. Grace called a little after 9, and I almost let it ring, then remembered that was one of my worst habits and picked up. "You sound weird," she said. I said hello. "Right, but usually you make some crack about me calling after business hours." I rubbed my forehead. Sarah Mitchell messaged me. Grace went quiet. She knew the name. Kids are archivists of everything their parents think they've hidden. And she'd found an old fair photo in a toolbox drawer when she was 12 and asked who the girl was. What'd she say? She apologized. For what? That's the part I don't have yet. Are you going to write back? I don't know. She was quiet a second, and then she said the thing I keep going back to. Dad, closure isn't the same as going backward. When did you get wise? College was expensive. I figured I'd get something out of it. Then, gentler, what if you don't like what she says? That's the fear. Then at least you'll be dealing with the truth instead of wrestling a ghost. You've been wrestling that ghost my whole life. I used to watch you go quiet at the fair every July, and I never knew why until I found that photo. That landed harder than she probably meant it to. After we hung up, I opened the message again and typed 3 different replies and deleted all of them. What I finally sent was 4 words. Hello, Sarah, I'm listening. She didn't answer until morning. I was standing in my driveway with a cup of coffee going cold when it came. Thank you for answering. I know I don't deserve it. I found your letters. I read that standing right there in the cold. Not remembered the letters. Not thought about. Found? What do you mean found? I typed. The 3 dots came and went and came again. My mother kept them. All of them, I think. They were in a cedar chest in her bedroom. She died in August. I found them last week, cleaning out the house. Owen, I never saw them. Not one of them. I didn't know you wrote. I sat down on the tailgate of my truck. A dog barked 2 houses down. A school bus hissed at the corner. Somewhere a man started a leaf blower too early, the way there's always one of those. I didn't really hear any of it. For 30 years, I'd believed Sarah had read my letters and chosen not to answer, that she'd weighed me and found me light. And here she was telling me the silence had been built for us. By her mother. By a cedar chest. By a pair of hands that decided what our future would be and then folded it up and put it away under the blankets. I should have felt relieved. What I felt was furious. Not just at Eleanor, who was dead now, which made the anger feel like yelling at a locked door. I was angry at the time itself, at all the years that didn't have the decency to pause while the truth sat hidden. At my younger self, who'd spent so long deciding that love was a thing people could quietly take back without warning. And, less fairly but more honestly, at Sarah too, for being on the other side of a wall I never knew was there. The phone buzzed again. I understand if you don't want to talk. I just needed you to know you weren't ignored. You were never ignored. I closed my eyes in the cold. You were never ignored. I'd waited 30 years to hear that, and it arrived too late to give it to the man who'd needed it most. We didn't talk face to face until Sunday. I asked for the few days because I needed to become someone who wouldn't punish her face for her mother's choices, and because middle-aged heartbreak still has invoices due on Friday. Sunday afternoon, I set the laptop on the kitchen table, made coffee I didn't drink, and clicked the link she sent. For a second, the screen showed me a ceiling. Then, Sarah was there, fussing with the camera, saying, "Sorry, I'm terrible at this," and the sound of her voice nearly took my legs out from under me. Older, lower, a little worn at the edges. Hers. There's no good word for seeing someone after 30 years while your memory keeps trying to lay their young face over the real one. She wore a soft gray sweater. Her hair was down. There was a small scar above the neckline near her collarbone, and she caught me notice it. "Heart surgery," she said. "September. Are you okay?" "I'm getting there." It had the sound of a phrase she'd said a lot. She looked down. I think the surgery scared me into being honest. And then the letters made it impossible to keep pretending the past was only the past. So, she told me. Her mother sent her to Lexington that summer, and then it was never quite time to come home. The car keys held back. The phone watched. The story put around that Sarah was overwhelmed and needed space. "I tried to call twice," she said. "The first time my mother stood in the hall and listened to the whole thing. The second time your father answered and said you were at work, and I lost my nerve and hung up before he could ask who it was. He never told me a girl called. He probably thought it was a wrong number. I didn't say my name." She pressed her fingers together. "I kept waiting for your letters. Every single day. And when they didn't come, I thought maybe you were angry. And then after long enough, I thought maybe my mother had been right, that a boy like you would move on the second things got hard." "A boy like me," I said. Her eyes filled. "I know. I hate that I let her words live in my head all those years." And there it was, Eleanor, still talking, 30 years on, out of both our mouths. Sarah told me the rest plainly. Her mother introduced her that fall to a young man named Alan in pre-med from a family that knew theirs, everyone approving before Sarah had decided whether she even liked him. She married him at 22, trained as a nurse because she needed work that felt useful enough to live inside. No children. The marriage lasted 19 years and ended politely, which somehow sounded lonelier than if it had ended in a fight. "I thought about you," she said. "I'm not saying that to be romantic. I just want to be honest with you for once. I thought about you whenever I saw fair lights. Whenever somebody fixed something without making a speech out of it. Whenever Alan looked straight through me and I remembered what it had felt like once to have somebody not do that. I had to stand up. The kitchen had gone too small." "You're angry," she said. "Yes at me?" I looked at her face on the screen and didn't soften it. "Yes," she nodded, and the tears finally came, and she said, "Good," that sat me back down. "Good? You should be," she said. "I didn't get your letters, but I stopped fighting sooner than I should have. I let my mother make your love sound like a child's thing because I was terrified of losing the only parent I had left. I married a man I didn't love enough because doing what I was told felt safer than grieving. And somewhere in all of it, I let the boy who loved me believe he'd been thrown away. The letters were her. The rest was me. And I'm not going to hand you a clean story where I'm only the victim of my mother. I didn't say anything, because there was nothing clean to say to that." Then she reached off screen and lifted a bundle tied with faded blue ribbon, and my chest went tight, because I knew exactly what it was. "I haven't read them all," she said. "I wanted to. And I also felt like I was breaking into a room where you'd been waiting alone. She gave a small, wrecked laugh. I'd like to give them back to you. In person. If you'll let me. We set it for the following Saturday at the fairgrounds. Closed for the season, the way it had been the last time we sat out there together. Poetic or foolish, I couldn't decide which. And I decided it didn't matter. Grace came by before I went, with soup I didn't ask for and opinions she pretended were offhand. She told me the shirt I had on was aggressively normal and made me change into the blue one, because fatherhood is a long lesson in humility. At the door she stopped and looked at me with her mother's straight-on way. Can I say a hard thing? You're going to either way. You've spent my whole life being a little bit guarded with everybody. Mom included. I always figured that was just you. But I'm starting to think it's her that something happened to you at 18 and you decided people leave. And you never let anybody all the way in again so it couldn't hurt that bad next time. She shrugged. So whatever you do Saturday, don't go to get an apology and call it even. Go to actually find out if you've been telling yourself the wrong story for 30 years. Because, if you have, that's not just about her. That's about the rest of your life. I didn't have an answer for that. She kissed my cheek, said be kind, not fake kind, the kind with boundaries, and left me standing in my kitchen feeling found out by my own child. Saturday came in cold and clear, that pale November light that makes everything look honest whether you want it to or not. Her car was already at the locked gate when I pulled up. She stood by the fence in a navy coat with the bundle held against her chest. And for one bad second 30 years folded over wrong and I saw the girl with the yellow ribbon. And then I saw the woman actually standing there, older and scared and real, which was better, because the woman was the one who'd come. Hi, Owen. Hi, Sarah. No hug. Not yet. We walked the outside of the fence because the gate was locked, leaves scraping along the pavement. And where the Ferris wheel used to stand there was just an empty patch of gravel now. That hurt more than I expected. They took it down 6 years ago, I said. And she said, I know. I looked it up, and of course she had. We found a bench by the exhibition hall, the same hall where we'd once danced badly at a summer concert because neither of us knew what to do with our hands. She sat first. I sat with a little space between us. She put the letters in my hands. The ribbon was close enough to the color she used to wear in her hair that memory made it cruel. I untied it slow. The first thing that got me wasn't the words. It was my own handwriting, young, slanted, impatient, full of a boy's certainty that if he just explained himself clearly enough, the world would have to answer. I opened the top one and read 3 lines and had to stop. Sarah, I went by your house today. Your mother said you needed space. I don't believe her. If you need space, tell me yourself and I'll try to respect it, but I need to hear it from you. I folded it back up. I sounded desperate. You sounded honest. I was desperate. I know. No pity in it, which helped. Then she reached into her coat pocket. I wrote one too. Back then. I never sent it. She handed me a single envelope gone yellow at the edges. My name on the front in her hand. Just Owen. My fingers weren't quite steady, and the wind had died, so I couldn't blame the paper shaking on anything but me. Owen, I don't know if you hate me. I think I'd hate me, if I were you. Mom says I'm being dramatic, that first love feels bigger than it is because it's never had to survive real life. But real life is exactly what I wanted with you. I'm scared and I'm angry, and I miss you so badly I feel foolish all day long. If you wrote, I didn't get it. If you stopped loving me, I'll try to understand. And if you didn't, please know I didn't leave because I wanted to. I don't know how to get back to myself. Sarah, I read it twice. Then a third time. The empty fairgrounds blurred at the edges. For 30 years I'd pictured her silent on the far side of all this, careless. Maybe sorry later, but silent when it counted. And she'd been sitting alone against the same wall the whole time, writing the same thing I was. And neither of us ever got to know it. I'm sorry, she said. Quiet. Beside me. And this time the apology didn't feel like a message on a screen. It felt like a person sitting next to me in the cold, finally putting her hand flat against the locked door. I loved you, I said. Her breath caught. I know. No, I need to say it as the man I am now, not the kid who wrote these. I loved you, and when you vanished, Something in me decided love was a thing people could take back without warning, and I carried that decision into rooms it had no business being in. Into my marriage. Into the way I let Linda go without much of a fight, because some part of me always half expected to be left anyway. I looked at her. My daughter said something to me this morning I can't shake, that I never let anybody all the way in again. She's right. So when you say you're sorry, I believe you. And I also have to tell you the apology isn't the whole thing I needed. I needed to know I wasn't a man who's easy to throw away. I built 30 years on the idea that I was. You weren't thrown away, she said, and her voice broke clean down the middle. You were taken away. From me. There's a difference. And I have spent the months since I found those letters wishing to God I'd fought harder so you'd have known it. We sat there a long time. No music, no rain coming down dramatic, no young bodies rushing at each other to make up for stolen time. Just two people old enough to know the truth doesn't erase the years, it only changes what the years meant. I'm sorry too, I said finally. For what? You did everything right. You wrote. You went to the door. For letting your mother's decision become my answer about myself. That stopped being her fault somewhere along the way and started being mine. Not at 18, but later. I kept the wound because it explained me. It was easier to be a man who was easy to leave than to figure out who I'd be without that story. She nodded slowly, like she knew exactly that kind of bargain. I didn't come back to ask for my old place, she said. I don't think it exists anymore. I came because I wanted you to know you were loved. Not perfectly, not bravely enough, but truly. That reached the boy first and then the man, and I couldn't answer it, so I just nodded. And when we finally hugged, it was careful for about a second, and then it wasn't. She fit differently than she had at 18 on the hood of a truck. Of course she did. We were two adults holding grief and regret and a marriage each, and a surgery and children not born and words never sent, and the strange mercy of not being dead before any of it got said out loud. When we stepped back, she wiped her face and asked, "Coffee?" And I laughed and said that was either a terrible idea or the only sensible one, and she said it could be both. We went to Ruth's. New owners, brighter lights, worse pie, the same bell over the door. We took a booth by the window and didn't mention that we'd split fries in that exact booth at 17. We talked for 2 hours not about getting back together, which would have been too small a thing to put on what had just happened. We talked about our actual lives. Linda, Grace, Alan, her nursing years, my business, my father's passing, her mother's hard final months, complicated by care and resentment and the awful fact that people who hurt you can still need you at the end. At one point she said, "I loved my mother. I need you to know that. It doesn't excuse her." I told her I understood. "Did you forgive her?" she asked, and I heard myself say no faster than I meant to. Then, "But I'm done letting her decide the weather." Sarah looked out the window a while and said, "That might be enough for now." It went slow after that, the way we'd both earned the right to go slow. We were careful with each other, and we had every reason to be. She'd hurt me. She'd also handed me back the truth. I was grateful and angry sometimes in the same 10 minutes, and she never once asked me to pick just one. That, more than anything, was what let trust start growing back. Grace met her in February and ambushed the whole emotionally complicated evening with a hug at the door, the way Grace does, and over dinner asked whether we'd been adorable or unbearable as teenagers, and Sarah said both at the exact moment I said adorable, and Grace said that tracked that I'd always overrated my own charm. And Sarah laughed, and the sound of it filled my kitchen without erasing a single thing in it. Not Linda, not the years. It just came in and sat down alongside all of it. And that was when I started to understand the thing I'd had backward my whole life: a second chance doesn't give you the first one back. It only asks whether you're willing to meet what's left with the truth. A year after that first message, on a warm night in June, the fair was open again, lights strung everywhere, kids running with paper cups of lemonade, fried dough and cut grass on the air, every summer I'd ever survived all at once. We walked past the lemonade stand where a girl once told me I looked like I'd lost a fight with a toolbox. I bought 2 cups, because some things you have to do on purpose. We stood by the fence away from the crowd, and I said I was glad she'd found me, and she said she was glad I'd let her, and that was the whole difference between us. Right there. She had found me. I had let the door come open. I leaned in slow enough that both of us got to choose it, and she met me halfway. And it was gentle, not young, not starving for the lost years, just a quiet agreement to stop pretending we could ever get those years back, and to not waste the ones still in front of us. When we pulled apart, she laughed through tears and said she was worried she tasted like lemonade. I told her she did. She asked if that was bad. I said no. And she put her forehead against mine, and out past the fence the new Ferris wheel turned slow against the dark, full of light, carrying people up to where they could see the whole town and back down again. 30 years ago, Sarah Mitchell disappeared out of my life, and I spent all of them since believing the silence was her answer. It wasn't. The silence was just a locked room, and the answer had been sitting the whole time in a cedar chest under folded blankets, waiting for two people to get brave enough, or old enough, or finally tired enough to lift the lid. She didn't give me back the boy I used to be. Nobody could do that. And that boy grew up into me anyway, carrying questions he never should have had to carry, loving other people, raising a daughter, learning to wire a house and sign divorce papers and apologize late and keep going. She didn't erase any of it. She gave me something simpler and harder than that. She gave me the truth that boy had deserved all along, that he was never easy to throw away, that he was only ever taken, and then she stood next to me in the lemonade light while I figured out, at 54, that it had come right on time,